Thank you so much, Nicoletta, and everyone listening in for giving me and Sweden the opportunity to talk about this hugely important topic. You already mentioned that Sweden wants to become the first fossil-free welfare country, and I will just continue on that line. This, in fact, was a goal that was set already in 2017, and it means that Sweden should have net zero emissions by 2045 and to have negative emissions from that onwards. And today, this morning, I'd like to highlight 4 points that are relevant for reaching this goal. And the first goal is having a long-term policy frameworks that binds consecutive governments. I want to say that implementation needs to be evaluated. There needs to be collaboration between government and the private sector. And I also want to mention the mental and practical shift to a circular economy. So the fossil-free goal is laid down in Sweden's climate policy framework, and this framework contains and this framework was adopted with support of the Parliament. And this is important because it means it binds consecutive and future governments, because we all know that decreasing the emissions and changing behavior will not happen overnight. So we need a long-term perspective to do this. And this is also what makes this goal, in fact, both attainable and genuine. And the climate policy frameworks rests on 3 pillars. There's legislation, there's an action plan, and there is evaluation. And the climate law is, in fact, what requires the Swedish government to bring forward an action plan at the beginning of each parliamentary mandate period, and then to report to the Parliament annually on its implementation. And this report is being evaluated by the so-called Climate Policy Council. And in fact, it just recently shared its report on the government's work for 2020. And the Policy Council has said that, in fact, the speed of the transition in Sweden is not fast enough to reach the goal, and it recommends that the Swedish government should focus the recovery from the pandemic more on fossil-free competition. And in fact, this year's budget, state budget in Sweden, is the greenest in the history. So let's see if that will help to pick up the pace. And in fact, what Sweden has done also is that we've shown that it is, in fact, possible to reduce emissions while maintaining economic growth. So in the last about 25 years, the Swedish GDP increased by 71% and the emissions fell by 26%. So Sweden is hereby at the forefront of an inclusive and technology-driven green transition that also creates jobs for the future. And it is, in fact, very much an industry-driven transition. Here I'd like to mention the example of the so-called Fossil-Free Sweden initiative. It's an initiative where about 450 different actors and companies have come together to take part in the transition. And so far, 22 industry sectors in Sweden have presented their own roadmaps for sectorial decarbonization. And many of these companies are in fact active on the global market, and many of them, of these Swedish companies, are also active in Romania, such as Volvo, IKEA, Securitas, Skanska, SKF. And this means that, you know, their ongoing efforts to strengthen their own competition by competitiveness by going fossil free will also strengthen the global transition, and that of course also includes the transition here in Romania where they are present. I'd also like to mention another example of fossil free steel. Steel making is in Sweden, it's the oldest and in fact the most important industry that we have. It's the industry upon which Sweden built much of our economic welfare. And today, 3 of the most important companies, both state-owned companies and private companies, have come together to set up an initiative to produce fossil-free steel by replacing the traditional coal by hydrogen. And this initiative is called Hybrid. So since 2020, there is a fossil-free steel factory up in the north of Sweden. And if this, and as this fossil-free steel making continues, this could reduce the CO2 emissions in Sweden by 6%, and it could reduce the global emissions by 10% if more countries were to use this fossil-free method. And since the steelmaking is, in fact, the biggest industry in Sweden, but also one of the biggest polluters, this is a huge transition, a huge step forward for fossil-free industry. And of course, Sweden encourages all countries to integrate climate action in national budgets and in national planning processes to facilitate resource mobilization. And here is, of course, where the climate, where the strategy for circular economy becomes very important. Sweden's strategy for circular economy is, in fact, the backbone for the transition for the entire society. The rationale for this circular strategy is quite clear. It's about using materials more efficiently, to reduce the extraction of new materials, and to diminish landfill, to diminish the waste from it. And the vision for the Swedish circular economy is a society in which resources are used efficiently in a non-toxic circular flow, replacing virgin materials. That's our vision. And as many of you know, circular economy is both about a biological circle and a technical circle. And examples of the biological circle is, of course, where you can have a biological degradation, creating biogas that can be reused as energy, as fuel. And in the technical cycle, it is about ensuring that products are in fact designed to be reused. So you can have a circulation of products, components, and materials. And the motto here is, of course, repair, refurbish, modernize, recycle. That's the basis of the circular economy. And this strategy, of course, helps Sweden not only to achieve our own national climate and environmental goals, but it also helps us to attain the international goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. The strategy covers 4 areas: sustainable production and production design, sustainable ways of consuming and using materials and products, a toxin-free and circular eco-cycles, and to be a driving force for businesses to promote innovation and circular business models. And there are, of course, many ways to try and steer, to try and influence the society towards a transition. And I'd like to give a few practical examples, both for the private and the public sector. But one way would be, of course, to make sure that you have resource efficiency and recycling part of public tenders. That is a way to set the standards. And of course, another way is to make sure that products are designed in a way to have a long lifespan, perhaps different from today. The last things I want to say is that it is absolutely crucial to promote research innovation and technology development in these areas. And Sweden is, in fact, an open showroom for such innovations and technology that is already existing, and it is being implemented in Sweden. And in a recent Swedish innovation discovery in the textile field, textiles are being decomposed, degraded back into textile fibers that can be reused for new textile materials. And in fact, This is incredibly important because I think many of you know already, the textile industry, I think, is responsible for about 10% of the global emissions, but only 1% so far is being recycled. So this is also an enormous step forward in the textile industry. And you can see other examples of innovation and technology in this Fossil-Free Sweden website that I mentioned. And also you will be hearing from the Swedish Celsius initiative later today and tomorrow in a workshop. My final words will be to underline that collaboration is key. By setting common goals and working together within our countries, within the private sector, academic and public sector, results will and can be achieved much faster. And by sharing ideas, best practices between our countries, as we are all going through the same transition, I believe great things can be done. So I really want to thank Guerrilla Verde for setting up this important information and practical sharing opportunity. And I really wish that we all make use of the momentum that we have right now in the green transition. Thank you very much for listening.